Yeah, we're okay about here. Just beside us here was Barclay's Garden. There's 3 or 4 new houses built there. And across there were single-storey houses. You can see the track on the wall where the single stories, where the house used to come out onto the street. Next door then, that was Brady's pub. They were there a long, long time. There was a priest in that family. He went to Australia, Father Hugh Brady, and he was out in the Kimberley Mountains. I'm not too familiar with the Australian geography. And he did most of his ministry in Perth, and he's buried in Perth. Here we had the forge. There were 2 forges in the village. There was one down where, when I was small or young, Nicky Cusick lived in Packy. It's now where the priest's house is, and there also was a school down there. But there was a forge here as well, and each of them were run by Sadler family. And I think this was run by James Sadler. And I remember Tommy Brown telling a story about them. They used to visit here at night, and they used to have porridge on the fire for the next day. And the old boys would come in, and before they'd be talking all night and they'd be eating all night. By the time the night would come, the porridge would be gone. It'd be rows. But anyway, it was closed before I was on the street. I never remember it. And so that's Tommy's and Barclay's, and we go up to Corn's, then that was Mulligan's Bar, and the hall. We go on up the street here.
Will we go over on the other side?
Yeah.
Mr. Somebody more here, Sadler's.
What's all right? I'm not mentioning borders.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm not. But what's the border? I don't think there is on the book. I have no more in the book. No? This was the home of a man called Bill Leddy, and it was a single-storied house. And I forgot to mention that down at the chapel, when the 1932, because Raymond came across that, the 1932 Eucharistic Congress was on. They took all the furniture out from the chapel and they put it on the main street. And I'm not sure who had the radio, but I presume it was Lane's had the radio. And they listened to the Mass for the 1932 Eucharistic Congress. Now, they also listened to football games in Lane's Yard. They would take the seats over from the chapel into Lane's Yard and listen to the football games that Carden were involved in. And this was another house where they used to bring the seats outside. This was a single-story one house, Bill Leddy. He'd be related to the Murphys and Father Aidan Foynes. I don't know, is Martina there? Yeah, and I think her mother's family is that right? And they used to bring out chairs and seats here, listen to the games here as well. And Cavan was a winning force that time. They're not now, unfortunately, but maybe tomorrow. And over at Collins, we said that belonged to a family called Mulligan's. That was a single-story building in about 1938, I think it was. And we have a good description over there in the book about somebody going to play cards in it. There's a big open heart fire in the front of it, or in the Clinton area of it. We have up above there where the hall is, beyond that's the creamery, is the hall field. We used to always play our games. Here's the creamery field where the creamery was built and the stores built. That was built in the early 60s. And the creamery, as we know, as we mentioned earlier, was built in 1934, or opened in 1934. We'll see now. I went through, we were lucky to get this in the book, and I don't want to go through it now, but we got a whole lot of, we got a book for the shop book, 2 shop books for the grocery items, and there also were boots and clothing sold in that shop. And we got the book for 1907, and some of the items were in it, like, you know, boys' boots 6 shillings, ladies' boots 6 shillings, braces 6 pence, cod liver oil a penny. There's a whole 1894, there was another man described in the village in some of the sense as John Riley was a shoemaker. Somebody else was described as a draper and shoes and grocery. These shops all supplied drink, groceries, farm supplies, ladies and boys and items, the smaller things. You'd have to go to town for the good suit, or go to Cavan Town, or you might go to Torbat or Kilstrandra. So we haven't covered, we're going down now. Terry will take us down to the football field and go through the history of the football field and the history of the school. We haven't covered a whole lot of very ancient sites around here, which I'm not going to go into now. Orney, down in Orney, the records go back to 1427. Anna, we have records go back to 1400s there too. There was an O'Reilly family at Anna, Dr. John O'Reilly. He had a dispensary here in the village during the famine in 1847, and there was a room he had taken from William Wallace. And that house there was owned by William Wallace. And that went from Wallace's to Mulligan's to Barclays and Farrelly's, and then it went to the Smiths. And this family here went from Smiths, went from Brady's to Smiths, and remained in the Smiths name. But there was a family called O'Donnell in there in 1886, and we know nothing of them. But so there's a lot of tradition. Just to get back to this, Dr. O'Reilly, he had a dispensary in the village during the famine, and I think it was over in that house there. That Dr. O'Reilly from Anna, he was a very good friend of Daniel O'Connor's, and he married. It's very unusual, and somebody who's interested in history more than I. It's a kind of a contradiction in terms, because he wasn't allowed to stand in the jury service in Cavan, and he made a stand on it and a big protest about it, and he wasn't. He says, you won't let me in, he says, because I'm a Catholic. And they said, no, it's not because you're a Catholic. He says, it is, and he stormed out. And this guy was a doctor, but the contradiction of it is that he married a girl called Chamberlain, and this Chamberlain was from Birkenhead in Liverpool. And these Chamberlains in Birkenhead, they were all very much Freemasons, and they were very, very much on the other side of the religious divide, which is very prominent at that time. So somebody who knows something, I don't know, he actually died going over to his mother-in-law's funeral in Birkenhead, and there's a record of that, and a record of I don't know what he died of now, but he died a very young man. He was only 47 or 48. But there's a contradiction in terms about there's a couple of things just to wind up before I hand you over to Terry. We're not covering a place over here where Seamus Flynn lives. Just behind his house down in one of the fields, it's such unbelievable. There's what they call the Giant's Grave. It's a wedge tomb, and it goes back to the Bronze Age. And there was also when they were doing the bypass here, they found discarded struck flint, and that was in 1999, and it was dated back to 4,500 BC. And as I mentioned earlier, the mass rock is over there as well. So, like the village here, there's been people knocking about it for thousands of years, and we're the present occupants of the landscape. The last thing I'll say now before we go is just to finish. We mentioned the forge down at Packicusic's, down at the priest's house. We'll be walking down there in a minute. And that also was a distribution centre for Indian meal during the famine. It was also a schoolhouse there. In the 1835 census, there was mention of a schoolhouse down there as well. At that time, schools weren't formally structured. There was an informal structure to schools. I don't know when I think it was about the 1840s that there was a discipline from the national government's point of view put to the school. So you'd find two schools in Ardrum-McGull, you'd find one in Orney, you'd find one in Acremont, you'd find one in they're all over the place. But down there was a school. I don't know exactly what date it was. And the last thing to say is the graveyard. It was opened in 1939. The first man that was buried in it was a man called Joseph O'Reilly. He's from Orney, and he was Mrs. Barclay's father. And there's a lovely story told by Phil McCarter to me that Mrs. Barclay was invited down to see people home from America. They were living down in Tevens, where Andy McConnell lives, and she wouldn't go down because her father was the only person buried in the graveyard. So I'm sure I've left a lot of things out in it, but the big thing about talking about this, we're talking about our landscape. The landscape is one thing, the people are another, and the present generation are a credit to the past generations and all the energy and all of the good work that's been done here. But really and truly, we're walking the pathway of a lot of the hard work done by previous generations. That's not to say that the present generation is doing a fantastic job, but I'm proud of our previous generations, our forefathers and our foremothers, and it's a pleasure for me to be here today, and thank you very much.
I've time is going on, so we've just two more items now. A brief stop at the school, and then a very short history at the football club, and then there's a cup of tea for everybody. So if you come this way.
The jail is not right.
Well, no, I was mistaken.
No.
I was wrong.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
good.